Welcome to another lecture session on world media scenario after Second World War. Previously, we discussed about the Cold War sessions and how media used by both the camps, the Eastern and the Western Bloc, the capitalists and the communists, in order to inculcate a certain kind of value system which was dealing with business, arts, aesthetics, and our human thought. Now, in today's lecture, we will discuss about the emergence of the third world countries and the notion of the non-aligned nations with its relevance. A very basic question comes: what is known as the third world? Now, in our country, we address India as a developing nation. Of course, these developing nations were previously called the third world nations. And the third world nations have a particular history attached to them. You'll find that a lot of countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia are called third world countries because of their economic jeopardy, which was caused by the previous colonizing powers. You will find that in India we had the British rule, in Latin America we had the British, the Portuguese, and the Spanish rule. In different parts of Africa we had rules of various European colonizing powers. But these nations gained their independence after Second World War, and it took some time, or it is taking still now. The third world nations are battling it out to have an economic stability. Now, these are very important aspects, which is also related to the world of media. To a great extent, for a lot of scholars, third world countries, or the idea of third world nations, is a media created idea. I repeat myself: third world nations and its ideas are often considered to be, by a lot of scholars, is a manipulation and a creation of the media belonging to the first world nations. That's a very debatable question, but to a great extent it's right. We can recollect that a famous philosopher and a theoretician called Edward Said told something similar regarding Orientalism. What was Orientalism, or who are the Orientals? It's an idea created by the Europeans regarding the Africans and the Asians. It was irrespective of the fact that how well the Europeans knew the Africans or the Asians, but it was from their point of view, from their imaginary status, that they created an image of the Africans and the Asians. When it comes to third world country and Western media, it is almost the same story. It is, to a great extent, it is a notion created by the media. A very important part is that the third world nations are used by the idea of third world nations are used by the Western media for their own benefit, for their own target, whether it is aesthetic, whether it's economic, or whatever we may say. It's a very interesting point that starting from Hollywood films, starting from the media, starting from even cartoons and animation films, we have a set of ideas regarding the third world. Third world, the first and foremost thing that comes to our mind is poverty. Poverty, lack of hygiene, lack of health care, lack of education, and one of the biggest threats that we still face, even in a country like India, is that the population. So the population boom, with other attachments to it, which are not particularly beneficial for the people of third world countries, they become the topics of discussion. They become the topics of culture. They become the topics of storylines, of films, when it comes to Western media. Of course, this is a kind of a critical view of the Western media that a lot of Western scholars have. But in another way, we can watch, or we can view this kind of a of a view that is created by the first world regarding the third world. One thing should be mentioned here is that the term third world was coined by the French economist and demographer Alfred Sauvy as late as 1952. So, one thing is clear, that the emergence of the third world nations and the idea of the third world nation has come after Second World War. That's a very interesting development. And after Second World War, uh, we we find out some very interesting things happening in the history. A lot of colonized countries were getting their freedom, and these countries were tagged as third world. It's almost like these countries never tagged themselves with the name of third world or the third nations. Now, it's a very interesting point that if the third world countries are dominated by a lot of miseries, then we can expect that the third world nations can expect, along with the help of media, they can expect that a lot of aid, a lot of help will be coming from the first world country. To a great extent, UNESCO, UNICEF, a lot of nations, a lot of world organizations are there who invoke a lot of cultural and media related programs in order to help out the health, hygiene, education, and a lot of things in third world countries using media, of course, using media. But at the same time, if I might say, according to a lot of scholars, that media has also penetrated in the third world nations, not as an angel who will pull us out from our miseries, but as a matter of fact, the media has been more active in creating consumers out of third world countries. Why do the third world countries have to be the people of third world countries have to be turned into consumers? That's a pertinent question that you might ask, because the third world countries are poor and we don't have the money to buy things that the Western people might do. But then why the third world countries are very profiteering markets? Of course, it's a profiteering market for the West because of this simple concept of population. Now, even if India lives under 60% of people under poverty line, but the rest of the 30% or 40%, if you can if a business policy or a marketing strategy can convert these 30 or 20% of the population, even then the market is huge, because the population of India is almost 130 crores. So that's a very interesting part that we always miss. And instead of media helping the third world countries from their miseries, the media is more often acts as a tool, as a vehicle to promote capitalism, to promote consumerism. You might see that a person who has not a proper place to stay, or we can see it in our own city, in our own country, not a proper place to stay or not enough money to go to school, but we have that particular person has more than one cell phone or a particular disc antenna with which he can see a lot of cable channels. So this is a kind of consumerism which is promoted by the media in the third world countries. Now, if we talk about free market policies, consumption, consumerization, capitalism in a country or in countries where where most of the people are poor and do not have enough money to buy luxury goods, then how are these markets proving to be really profit bearing? Well, according to theory, we have this idea of dominant paradigm, which is a part which is often hidden under the logic of development. Mass media is often used as an index and a tool by the first world country for developing the third world nations. That's a very interesting concept put forward by the media scholar Lerner. But what is this aspect of development? Is this aspect of development for education, health? More than education and health, the media is often used for business purposes, for privatization, for industrialization, for much less needed technological aspects rather than health. Now, one thing has to be borne in mind, that people who do not have the money to look after their health has to pay a lot of money for their health and hygiene. What I mean is that in third world nations, you do not have free health care and free education. On the other hand, it's an irony that people of the first world country who have a lot of money in their pockets, they have free health care and education. It might be a joke, but this joke is not really funny when it comes to the third world poor people. Now, aspects of development as propagated by the world media and used by the first world nations, on record, these are education, social media, eradication of poverty, capital-oriented livelihood, and most importantly, urbanization. More than often, for these purposes, globalization and free market policies are implemented by the businessmen, and how the third world nations accept these business policies is through the use of mass media. Now, let's say in a country in the scorching heat of 40 degrees, in a country like India, in some of the remote suburbs, if you are thirsty, the first thing that comes to your mind is either Thumbs Up or Coke or Pepsi or any kind of beverages or cold drink, carbonated drinks, which are not Indian in nature. We do not think about having some kind of indigenous product, indigenous bottled product, because we have none. So in a third world country, the business of the multinational corporations are at its peak. Non-alignment bloc was something that was first proposed by the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. It was defined as a foreign policy in response to the Cold War, which started after Second World War. Now, there are certain countries which were there in the non-alignment bloc. By non-alignment bloc, we mean that these nations were not aligned to any of these superpowers. By superpowers, what we mean is the capitalist United States and the Western Bloc, or the communist or the socialist Eastern Bloc of Soviet Union and Hungary and so on. So it's a kind of a point of pride that India and Jawaharlal Nehru was the first person to propose this, and in this era of hatred towards our neighboring countries, Pakistan was also in these non-alignment bloc. Why was it relevant? Because a lot of countries, including Cuba is a socialist country. We have a lot of wrong notions about Cuba, that Cuba is very poor and Cuba is not like the other first world countries. It's very poor, a lot of crimes are there, and they are one of the allies of Soviet Union. We are totally wrong about this, because Cuba, apart from India, Pakistan, Burma, Malaysia, was another country who were there in the non-alignment bloc. Now, there was this movement going on called non-alignment movement. It was a strong movement against the very powerful foreign policies of both these blocs. So the non-alignment bloc started a movement called the non-alignment movement, which is known as NAM or NAM. Now, it is an intergovernmental organization of states which vowed to the purpose of their own independence, maintaining their independence and not giving their freedom or their foreign policies away to these powerful blocs. Now, what are the features of NAM? First and foremost is the nationalism. They wanted, all these countries, they wanted to adhere to their national identity. Nationalism is not always hating the other country and loving, blind love towards the self, but also putting up the identities of that particular nation. Very important aspect of anti-colonialism. Underdeveloped and economic underdevelopment, strategies to fight underdevelopment through economic aids, for which these non-alignment bloc also could go to either of these two powerful blocs for monetary or for technological assistance. Now, racial and cultural aspects were to be upheld. Now, India, Pakistan, Asia and Southeast Asian countries, they are so many cultural values are there, so many cultural representations are there which had to be identified. There was another strategic target was there with NAM, was that it wanted to join the UNO, United Nations Organization, which will greatly benefit these non-alignment countries. And of course, which will again give these non-aligned countries their own foreign policy, which will not be dictated by the superpowers. Now, Cuba, Yugoslavia, India were the major non-aligned nations. The non-alignment movement was formed as an attempt to thwart away the Cold War, or the Cold War was fought between two political nations, and a lot of the whole world was being used as a pawn, as just puppets, and which would dance and move according to the wishes of these two blocs. The non-aligned countries blocked or didn't allow this to happen. But a kind of blow was dealt to this non-alignment movement with the breaking of Yugoslavia. Now, the breaking of Yugoslavia near the end of 1980s and also ending of Cold War was almost the final coffin to this NAM or non-aligned movement. And we can still see that India and Pakistan, instead of doing something productive together, we are in bitter political and economic relationships. Now, Second World War gave media a scope, a huge platform to use the ideas of two powerful nations in terms of politics, in terms of culture. Then it helped these two nations in disseminating their ideas and values during the Cold War. When the other countries who were not wanting to be a part of this nasty Cold War between two nations, they formed the non-aligned bloc. But with the ending of Cold War, the non-aligned blocs had nothing to fight against, and especially when India and Pakistan, their relationship was deteriorating, and Yugoslavia was breaking down, and a major communication loss was there. The non-aligned countries were no more there together to start or to restart the movement that once Jawaharlal Nehru wanted. Now, we have seen that how media was manipulated and used by the powerful blocs during the Cold War, during the Second World War, even during the generation of ideas of third world country, and how media was used in order to penetrate into the market of the third world country in order to increase the consumer data and the consumer bank. But And again, we just now discussed about how the non-aligned countries failed, which they really wanted to achieve, failed in that aspect. But if we question how these things happened and how media was so successful in breaking and damaging the dreams of a lot of nations who never wanted to become a part of the bigger political games played by the bigger political powers. Uh, in this regard, a very important philosopher and political analyst is there called Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is particularly popular because of his phenomenal work called Manufacturing Consent. This is a very popular book, and in this book, it is said that how media is used, or how media uses our the consents of the common people to be manufactured. So we don't have our consent. The consent is manufactured by the various forms of media. And in later period, Noam Chomsky had written another very seminal work on this regard, is that Necessary Illusions, which says that there are certain illusions which has to be created by the media for the third world country, so that we understand, we acknowledge, and we give consent to the economic, political, and aesthetic and cultural decisions of the first world countries, even if it is at the cost of our own. It was thought that after Second World War, after so much of disasters and deaths throughout the world in wars had taken place, media would take a huge role in order to resettle lives, in order to give us what we had already lost and to develop our lives. But on the contrary, what Noam Chomsky is saying is that media takes each and every audience as client, as customers, and media is not there as a savior, but media is always manipulated in order to penetrate into our minds and make us or take our decisions, which are actually not ours. So with that, we come to the end of the second part of world media scenario after Second World War. I'm sure this lecture session will encourage a lot of energy into you in order to explore more things on this, on Chomsky, on Second World War, on media, on non-alignment, on Cold War, and I'm sure a lot of questions will be answered and a lot of questions will be raised again. Thank you.